Don't take her! The child's voice cracked through the air, thin but sharp enough to cut through the low hum of idling engines and distant traffic as red and blue lights washed over the cracked asphalt in restless waves, and Naomi Carter's cheek pressed against the ground felt the grit and heat still lingering from the late afternoon sun, her breath steady, measured, completely out of rhythm with the urgency around her, while a gloved hand hovered near her shoulder and another voice, firm and practiced, said, "Ma'am, stay still." Not shouted, not cruel, just controlled, like a line repeated too many times to too many people, and around them a small crowd had already formed, phones raised, whispers building into a soft, uneasy chorus as if the scene had already decided what it was before it even began, a story written in seconds without her consent, and Naomi didn't look at them, didn't search for sympathy or resistance. Her eyes instead fixed on the thin line where the street met the curb, where dust gathered in quiet corners, because stillness was something she understood, something she had practiced long before this moment, long before anyone here had ever seen her, and somewhere behind her a car door shut with a hollow thud, followed by measured footsteps approaching, slower than the others, heavier with authority, and when Agent Daniel Brooks stepped into view, his shadow cutting across the light, everything seemed to tighten just slightly, like the air itself was waiting for him to decide what came next, his gaze scanning, calculating, landing on Naomi not as a person but as a situation to resolve, a file to close, and he spoke without raising his voice. "Name?" And Naomi blinked once, slow, deliberate, before answering. "Naomi Carter." Her tone even, almost soft, not defensive, not pleading, just present, and Brooks tilted his head slightly, as if weighing something unseen, while a younger agent shifted nearby, uncertain, glancing between them and the growing audience, the quiet tension stretching thinner with every second as a breeze moved through the street, lifting a loose strand of Naomi's hair and carrying with it the faint scent of gasoline and summer heat, and for a brief moment, the sirens seemed to fade into the background, not gone, just distant, like a memory instead of a threat, and Naomi inhaled slowly, deeply, her chest rising against the pavement, her heartbeat steady, unhurried, while her eyes, calm and focused, traced the edges of the moment, the angle of a stance, the spacing between feet, the rhythm of breath around her, not with fear, but with awareness. The kind that didn't come from panic, but from something older, something trained, and though no one around her could see it yet, though to them she was just another woman in the wrong place at the wrong time, something beneath that stillness had already begun to shift, quiet as a shadow moving across the ground, unnoticed, inevitable. Naomi Carter did not move right away, not because she was frozen but because stillness had always been her first language, learned in places where reacting too fast meant being misunderstood and reacting too slow meant being dismissed, so she chose the space in between, where control lived, and as the seconds stretched, she became aware of everything around her with quiet precision, the faint click of a radio adjusting on someone's shoulder, the uneven rhythm of a man breathing just behind her. Left side, the subtle shift of weight from one boot to another as an agent grew impatient, all small details that most people would never notice, but to her they formed a pattern, and patterns told stories, and stories revealed intent, and intent decided outcomes. And Naomi had learned long ago that outcomes could be shaped before anyone realized they were already changing. "You understand why you are being detained?" Agent Brooks asked, his tone steady, almost conversational, as if this were routine, as if she were expected to nod, to accept, to fit neatly into whatever assumption had already been made about her, and Naomi turned her head just enough to meet his eyes, not fully, just a fraction, enough to acknowledge him without surrendering the ground she held within herself. "I understand what you think you see," she replied, her voice calm, level, carrying no edge, no fear, only clarity, and for a brief moment something flickered across Brooks's expression, not doubt, not yet, but something closer to curiosity, quickly buried beneath training and habit, while the younger agent, Ethan Cole, shifted again, his grip uncertain, his gaze darting toward the small crowd where a woman whispered to someone beside her, "She does not look like a threat." And the words hung there, fragile, easily ignored, and yet they landed somewhere deeper than expected, because even the silence that followed them felt heavier, more complicated, like the scene was no longer as simple as it had first appeared, and Naomi inhaled again, slower this time, letting the air settle into her lungs, grounding herself not in fear but in awareness, because fear made people predictable, and predictability made them easy to control, and she had spent years unlearning that, years rebuilding herself into something quieter, something sharper. Something that did not react to pressure but absorbed it, redirected it, and somewhere in the back of her mind, memories moved like distant echoes, not fully formed, just impressions, heat against skin, long hours under open sky, the sound of boots against gravel in places far removed from the street, places where identity was not judged by appearance but by action, by discipline, by the ability to remain steady when everything else demanded chaos. And as those echoes settled, Naomi's posture changed just slightly. Not enough for the crowd to notice, not enough for the cameras to capture, but enough for the tension in the air to shift by a fraction, and sometimes a fraction was all it took, because in that fraction lived the difference between assumption and reality, between control and illusion, and Brooks sensed it, even if he could not yet name it, his eyes narrowing just a degree as he studied her more carefully now, not as a case, not as a statistic, but as a variable he had not accounted for. And Naomi held that moment without forcing it, without rushing it, because she understood something that no one else here did yet, that the story unfolding around them had already begun to change, quietly, invisibly, and there was nothing louder than a truth waiting to reveal itself. Agent Daniel Brooks straightened slightly, not stepping back, not stepping forward, but adjusting in a way that suggested he was no longer fully certain of the script he had been following, his eyes narrowing just enough to study Naomi Carter more closely, as if the quiet confidence in her voice had introduced a detail he could not immediately categorize, and around them the energy of the scene shifted again. Subtle but undeniable, the crowd no longer whispering with the same certainty, the phones still raised but now held a little steadier, as if waiting for something more than what they had expected to record, and Ethan Cole loosened his stance by a fraction, not enough to draw attention, but enough that Naomi could feel the difference in pressure, the kind of shift that revealed hesitation rather than control, and hesitation always spoke louder than words. "You think we are wrong?" Brooks asked, his tone still measured but now edged with something sharper, something probing, and Naomi turned her gaze fully toward him this time, her eyes steady, unflinching, reflecting not defiance but clarity. "I think you decided before you asked," she said, each word placed carefully, evenly, leaving no space for misunderstanding, and for a brief second the air between them seemed to still completely, the distant sirens fading into a low hum, the movement of the crowd slowing, as if the entire moment had narrowed to that exchange alone, and Brooks exhaled slowly through his nose, his jaw tightening just slightly as he processed her response, because it was not resistance in the way he expected, it was not emotional, not reactive, it was something else entirely, something controlled, and control, when it came from the wrong place, could be unsettling, and he shifted his attention to the agents around him, giving a small nod that signaled continuation, procedure, order, but the movement lacked the certainty it had carried only moments before, and Naomi noticed that too, not as a victory, not as an opportunity, but as confirmation that the balance had already begun to move, inch by inch, in ways that no one else could yet define, and as she adjusted her breathing again, slow and deliberate, her awareness expanded beyond the immediate circle, catching the reflection of flashing lights in a nearby car window, the angle of shadows stretching across the pavement, the rhythm of footsteps as another unit approached from down the block, everything aligning into a quiet map in her mind, a structure of movement and timing that she had built countless times before in environments far less forgiving than this one. And though no one here could see it, though to them she still appeared as a woman held in place by authority, Naomi was no longer inside their version of the moment, she had stepped outside of it entirely, observing, calculating, waiting, not for permission, not for escalation, but for the exact second when truth would no longer be something she carried alone, and Brooks, standing just a few feet away, felt that shift without understanding it, like a pressure change before a storm. Subtle, invisible, but impossible to ignore, and for the first time since he arrived, he hesitated, just for a heartbeat, just long enough for doubt to exist, and sometimes doubt was all it took to unravel everything that came before. The wind shifted again, softer now, carrying with it the distant rumble of a passing truck and the faint murmur of voices blending into one indistinct layer of noise, and Naomi Carter let that sound settle around her without reacting to it, her focus narrowing instead on the immediate space, the distance between herself and Agent Daniel Brooks, the angle of his shoulders, the slight tension in his hands that he was trying to conceal, and she recognized it for what it was, not aggression, not certainty, but control under pressure, the kind that could fracture if pushed in the wrong direction, and she had no intention of pushing, not yet, because control, when challenged too directly, often turned defensive, and defensive choices rarely led to clarity. "Ma'am, we need you to stand up slowly," Ethan Cole said from her side, his voice quieter now, less certain than before, as if he was speaking into a situation that no longer felt as straightforward as it had moments ago, and Naomi responded without hesitation, moving with measured precision, not rushed, not hesitant, rising from the pavement in a single smooth motion that carried no resistance and no submission, just presence, her posture straightening as she faced them fully now, the late afternoon light catching the edges of her face, revealing details the crowd had not noticed before, the steadiness in her gaze, the absence of panic, the quiet composure that did not match the narrative unfolding around her. And as she stood there, hands visible, shoulders relaxed, something in the dynamic shifted again, subtle but undeniable, because people expected tension in moments like this, expected raised voices, sharp movements, visible fear. But Naomi offered none of that, and in its place there was something harder to define, something that made the space feel less controlled, not because she disrupted it, but because she did not conform to it, and Brooks noticed that immediately. His eyes tracking her movements with sharper focus now, recalibrating, reassessing, as if he were trying to place her within a framework that no longer quite fit. "You are going to provide identification," he said, his tone firm but lacking the earlier edge of assumption, and Naomi nodded once, a small, deliberate motion, before reaching slowly toward the pocket of her work jacket, not hurried, not cautious, but intentional, every movement clear, visible, transparent. And as her fingers brushed the edge of something inside, she paused for just a fraction of a second, not long enough to alarm, not long enough to disrupt, but long enough to choose, and that choice carried weight, because what she revealed next would not just answer a question, it would change the direction of everything unfolding here, and she understood that completely, understood that truth, once placed into the open, could not be taken back, could not be ignored, and yet she did not rush to reveal it. Because timing mattered. Because understanding mattered. Because this moment was no longer just about her, it was about what they saw, what they assumed, what they failed to recognize, and as the crowd leaned in just slightly, phone steady, breath held in quiet anticipation, Naomi drew her hand out slowly, the object still partially concealed within her grasp, the sunlight catching a faint metallic edge that flickered for only an instant. And Brooks's gaze locked onto it immediately, his posture tightening, his attention sharpening into something closer to focus than control, and in that suspended second, where expectation met uncertainty, Naomi lifted her eyes to meet his again, calm, unwavering, as if offering him one final chance to see clearly before the truth stepped fully into the light. The metallic edge caught the sunlight again, brighter this time, no longer a flicker but a presence. And Naomi Carter did not rush the motion as she brought it fully into view, her fingers steady, her posture unchanged, the object resting in her hand not like a defense, not like a threat, but like a fact that had always existed whether anyone had noticed it or not, and for a brief moment no one spoke, not the agents, not the crowd, not even the child whose voice had started it all, because something about the way she held it, the way she stood, shifted the energy in a way that words could not immediately follow, and Agent Daniel Brooks's eyes locked onto it with a focus that replaced everything else, the surrounding noise fading into a distant blur as recognition began to form, slow but undeniable, his expression tightening not from anger but from recalculation. The kind that comes when a situation no longer aligns with its initial assumptions. "Where did you get that?" he asked. His voice lower now, more controlled, but carrying a weight that had not been there before, and Naomi met his gaze without hesitation. "It was issued to me," she replied, calm, precise, leaving no room for ambiguity, and Ethan Cole shifted beside her, his earlier uncertainty deepening into something closer to realization, his grip loosening just slightly as his eyes moved between Naomi and Brooks, searching for confirmation, searching for direction, because the structure he relied on was no longer as stable as it had been moments ago, and around them the crowd leaned in closer, the phones still raised but now capturing something entirely different, not a simple confrontation, not a predictable scene, but a moment that felt like it was about to turn into something else entirely, something none of them had expected to witness, and Naomi remained still within it, not asserting, not explaining, simply allowing the truth to exist in the space between them, because she understood that forcing recognition often led to resistance, but allowing it to unfold created something deeper. Something that could not easily be dismissed, and Brooks took a slow step back, not in retreat, but in adjustment, his mind working through layers of protocol, of training, of responsibility, each one colliding with the reality now in front of him, and for the first time since the encounter began, he did not immediately speak, did not immediately act, because certainty had been replaced with doubt, and doubt required verification, and verification required time, and time, in moments like this, changed everything. And Naomi watched that shift with quiet awareness, her breathing steady, her stance unchanged, knowing that the balance had moved, not through force, not through confrontation, but through truth, and truth, once seen, carried a weight that could not be undone, and in the stillness that followed, where no one rushed to fill the silence, the entire scene seemed to hold its breath, suspended between what had been assumed and what was now undeniably real. The silence did not break, it deepened, stretching outward like a held breath that no one dared to release, and Naomi Carter lowered her hand just slightly, not hiding the identification, not withdrawing it, simply letting it rest at her side as if it no longer needed to prove anything, because the weight of it had already settled into the space between them, and Agent Daniel Brooks remained still. His eyes no longer scanning the crowd or the perimeter but fixed on Naomi with a focus that had shifted from authority to recognition, not complete, not comfortable, but undeniable, and for the first time the structure he relied on felt less like certainty and more like something that required reconsideration, something that demanded he look again, slower this time, more carefully, and he exhaled through his nose, a controlled breath that carried with it the tension of recalibration, while Ethan Cole took a half step back, not instructed, not commanded, just instinctively responding to the shift he could feel but did not fully understand, and around them the crowd grew quieter, the earlier whispers replaced by a different kind of silence, one that carried awareness instead of assumption. Phones still raised but now capturing stillness rather than action, waiting rather than reacting, and Naomi stood within that stillness without claiming it, without pushing it forward, her posture relaxed but precise, her gaze steady, not challenging, not yielding, simply present in a way that made everything else seem louder by comparison, and in that quiet space her mind moved, not toward conflict, not toward defense, but toward memory, not as a distraction but as an anchor. The feel of dry heat against her skin in a place far removed from the street, the steady rhythm of controlled breathing under pressure. The understanding that calm was not the absence of tension but the mastery of it, and those memories did not surface as images but as sensation, grounding her, reinforcing the stillness she carried into this moment. And Brooks saw something in her then, something that did not align with the narrative he had formed at the beginning, something that did not match the role he had assigned her in his mind. And that realization did not come as a sudden shock but as a slow, unfolding awareness, the kind that reshapes perception piece by piece, until what once seemed obvious no longer holds. And he shifted his stance again, subtle, controlled, but different now, less rigid, less absolute, as if he were no longer standing above the situation but inside it, subject to the same uncertainty that had quietly taken hold of everyone present, and Naomi noticed that change without reacting to it. Because she understood that recognition, when it came, needed space to settle, needed silence to take root, and she gave him that space, not out of obligation, not out of submission, but out of something stronger, something grounded in control and clarity. And for a long moment neither of them spoke, Sirens now a distant echo, the city continuing around them as if unaware of the shift that had taken place in this small corner of the street, and in that moment the power that had defined the beginning of the encounter no longer felt one-sided, no longer anchored in assumption, but suspended, balanced on the edge of truth that had not yet fully been spoken aloud, and Naomi remained exactly where she was, steady, composed, allowing that truth to exist without forcing it forward because she knew something that no one else here fully understood yet, that the most powerful shift does not happen when someone fights to be seen, but when the world is forced to see them clearly without being told how. The shift did not arrive with noise, it arrived with understanding, quiet and irreversible, and Agent Daniel Brooks felt it settle into place the moment his eyes moved from the badge in Naomi Carter's hand back to her face, truly seeing her now, not as a situation, not as a variable, but as someone he had misread from the very beginning, and that realization did not come with drama, it came with stillness. The kind that forces a person to confront the space between what they believed and what was actually true, and he straightened slowly, not to reassert authority but to realign himself within a reality that had changed. His voice, when it came, measured, controlled, but carrying a different weight now. "Special operations?" he asked, not as a challenge, not as an accusation, but as confirmation, and Naomi met his gaze without hesitation, her expression steady, composed. "Yes," she replied, simple, direct, nothing added, nothing withheld, and that single word landed heavier than anything that had been said before, because it did not just answer a question, it reframed everything that had led to this moment. And Ethan Cole exhaled quietly beside them, the tension leaving his shoulders in a way that suggested he had been holding it without realizing, his eyes shifting away from Naomi for a brief second, not out of dismissal but out of reflection. As if replaying the last few minutes in his mind with a different understanding now, and around them the crowd reacted in a way that was almost imperceptible, a subtle shift in posture, a quiet murmur that carried recognition instead of speculation, the phone still recording but no longer chasing a spectacle, now capturing a realization unfolding in real time, and Brooks took a small step back, not out of retreat but out of respect, the kind that does not need to be announced to be understood, and for the first time since the encounter began. His stance no longer framed Naomi as someone to be controlled, but as someone to be acknowledged, and that distinction changed everything. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding," he said, the words careful, deliberate, not an excuse, not a dismissal, but an admission, however measured, that the situation had not been what it appeared to be, and Naomi did not respond immediately, not because she needed time, but because she understood the weight of that moment, understood that what had just shifted was not just the outcome of an interaction, but the perspective within it, and when she finally spoke, her voice remained calm, grounded, carrying no trace of anger. "There usually is," she said, not pointed, not accusatory, just honest, and Brooks held her gaze for a second longer, absorbing that, because it was not a statement about this moment alone, it was something broader, something that extended beyond the street, beyond the uniforms, beyond the assumptions that had shaped the beginning of this encounter, and in that realization, something in his expression softened, not visibly, not dramatically, but enough to mark the change, enough to show that the certainty he had carried into this moment had been replaced with something more complex, something more aware, and the silence that followed was no longer tense, no longer uncertain, it was settled, grounded, as if the truth that had emerged had finally found its place, and Naomi stood within it, unchanged. Not elevated by the revelation, not defined by it, simply present as she had been from the start, and in that presence, in that quiet consistency, the real shift became clear, not that she had proven anything, but that she had never needed to. The moment did not end with raised voices or sudden movement, it softened instead, settling into something quieter, something heavier in a way that lingered beyond the immediate scene, and Agent Daniel Brooks lowered his hand completely now, no longer holding tension in his posture, no longer framing Naomi Carter within a boundary she had never truly belonged to, his shoulders easing as he took another small step back, creating space not just physically but symbolically. And that space carried meaning, the kind that did not need to be spoken to be understood, and Ethan Cole mirrored the shift almost instinctively, adjusting his stance, his gaze no longer fixed on Naomi as a subject of authority but as someone he had misjudged, someone he was now trying to understand in a different light, and the crowd, once eager for conflict, began to change as well, the energy dissolving into something quieter, the phones lowering one by one. Not because the moment had lost importance, but because it had transformed into something less about spectacle and more about realization, and Naomi remained where she stood, her presence unchanged, her breathing steady, her posture relaxed but grounded, as if none of this had altered who she was, because it had not, it had only revealed what others had failed to see, and Brooks cleared his throat lightly, not to regain control but to find the right words, something measured, something that acknowledged without overstepping. "You are free to go," he said finally, the sentence simple, direct, but carrying an undercurrent of recognition that had not existed before, and Naomi gave a slight nod, not in submission, not in acceptance, but in acknowledgement, a quiet understanding that the moment had reached its natural conclusion, and for a brief second either of them moved, as if both understood that this was the point where the story could either end or evolve, and Naomi chose either. She simply stepped forward, not rushing, not hesitating, moving past the line where she had once been held, her footsteps calm against the pavement, each one steady, deliberate, grounded in a certainty that had never left her, and as she passed Brooks, their eyes met one last time, not as opposites, not as adversaries, but as two people standing on either side of a realization that had changed something fundamental, and Brooks inclined his head slightly, a gesture so small it could have been missed, but one that carried more meaning than any formal apology could have expressed, and Naomi continued walking, not looking back, not seeking validation, simply moving forward into the fading light of the street, where the red and blue reflections no longer touched her, where the air felt open again. And behind her, the agents remained still for a moment longer, the structure they had brought with them no longer as rigid as it had been, their understanding reshaped by something they could not ignore, and the city resumed its rhythm around them, cars passing, voices returning, life continuing as it always did, but for those who had witnessed it, something had shifted quietly, something that would not be easily forgotten. Not because of what had happened, but because of what had been revealed. In the stillness between it all, the street did not return to what it had been, even as the sound of traffic filled the space again and the flashing lights dimmed into the background of an ordinary evening, because something quieter had taken root, something that could not be undone simply by movement or noise, and Naomi Carter walked forward with the same steady rhythm she had carried from the beginning, her steps neither hurried nor slowed, her posture unchanged, as if the moment behind her had been absorbed into her without altering her direction, and the sunlight, now lower in the sky, stretched across the pavement in long, soft lines that followed her path, catching briefly on the edge of her jacket, on the outline of her hand, before fading again into the muted tones of the street, and she did not look back, not out of dismissal, not out of indifference, but because there was nothing behind her that required her attention anymore. The misunderstanding had already dissolved, the truth had already been seen, and what remained was not conflict but awareness, the kind that lingered in silence rather than in words, and behind her, Agent Daniel Brooks remained where he stood for a moment longer than necessary, his gaze following the direction she had gone without calling her back, without interrupting the quiet conclusion that had formed between them, and his stance, once defined by certainty, now carried something more reflective, something less rigid, as if the lines he had once relied on had softened into questions he had not yet fully answered, and Ethan Cole shifted beside him, glancing briefly at the space Naomi had occupied, then at Brooks, as if searching for confirmation that the moment had truly passed, and Brooks gave a small nod, not as a command, but as acknowledgement, a silent agreement that what had happened required no further action, no correction, no reinforcement, only understanding, and the crowd began to disperse, slowly at first,